Okay, we're looking at Sumerian tablets, and when you're deciphering a Sumerian tablet, like something like this, some of these tablets have a lot bigger rule in them. They're, a bunch bigger letters farther apart. You get to some of these um, real priestly tablets and the larger tablets, and they're done in a small, finite way, and you can even see the lines that they pre-draw and scratch on these things, and then come back and write the whole thing over it. But it's almost impossible to decipher just looking at it straight. Somebody that's extremely good at it can, but you often have to put this, well, you do have to put it under like a jeweler's magnifying glass and then tilt the thing back and forth trying to get a look at what certain symbols are. Quite often you're asking people their opinions, things like that to it. But whenever you get these, a lot of people have taken and copied these down. What you do is you get an expert that's done that, and they copy them onto paper. Like the one we were looking at, whenever you copy it down onto paper, it comes out to here, and then they just show you line numbers on the side of it, and it's deciphered out, and it's a little bit easier to make sense of. Although there is some variation on a theme that's in here. It seems like for posterity's sake, what they do is they copy it exactly like it's on the tablet. So you'll see a lot of symbols that look real similar, but not exactly quite. It's not like they have a stencil. This is all done by hand. So you can see things in here, like you see this star pattern right here at my point, right there, where it seems to have cloves on the upper left, and it's really made just like an X with two lines through it, right? And then there's clubs on the top part of it there. That symbol is known as Dingir. And there's a lot of them right in here, but you can see slight variations between that one and this one right here, and a whole line of them that are leading in right up here in Dingir, and there's another one there that looks terrible. Something I want to point out here, even though the tablet's fantastic, you can see that there's rubbed out spots here. When they do this stippling here, what this is called is a lacuna. And lacuna means a missing spot. That's all it really means. When you get into studying tablets and things like that, you'll find that a lot, and it'll just say lacuna, and you wonder what that is, and it's actually missing words. And ironically, it'll get right to it, and it'll say, and the whole meaning of life is. In fact, I made a joke in class. I said, towards the end of it, I said, I found out through the Sumerians what the meaning of life is, and he kind of looked at me over his glasses, and I said, lacuna, and he laughed. But this is, I think I've seen this before. This is either looking back at the flood, or this is the description of like the flood and the ruining of the lands. So let's see if I can look this up, T223, and we'll figure out what it is. Okay, hopefully you can see all that. Let me try to draw it in here. Okay, hopefully you can see all that. This is from the Oriental Institute at Oxford University. Looked up the ability to look at their stuff. I didn't go to Oxford, but my alma mater is hooked up with them. And this is the lament for Sumer and Urim. So this is the destruction of Sumer and Urim. And this is, I've made a video about this not long ago. Well, I say not long ago, it's been 3 years now or so. But this is about the flood and the destruction and the people being taken away from Sumer. And then what we know as Sumer after that point is not Sumer, but it's Elamites living in their land controlled by the Akkadians, and goes on and what happens to these people. So let's look into this here. To overturn the appointed times, to obliterate the divine plans, the storm gathered to strike like a flood on Enlil, Enki, and Ninharsaga. It's in mine, it was listed as Ninma, but that's where all the Dingir with the names behind them are across there that we were looking at right above our lands. It says, have decided its fate to overturn divine powers of Sumer, to lock up the favorable reign of its home, to destroy the city, to destroy the house, to destroy the cattle pens, to level the sheepfold, that the cattle should not stand in the pen, that the sheep should not multiply in the fold, that the watercourses should not carry brackish water, or should carry brackish water. This is an indication that this is a flood that breaks loose from the sea and backs up into there, or it's a tidal wave that comes way inland that causes this. Now, I talked before about the asteroid hitting and how giant tidal waves come, that was the flood that was listed over there, and it happened some 10,500 years ago. So, and I've had a few videos about it, and I even did one with a musical video where the object hitting the earth was far, far too big, of course, but it just gave you an idea of it. Now, it's terrible. This just goes into things, and this lament has got a poetry to it, and they repeat things over and over again if it gets important or real sorrowful. So, so they tell you the watercourses shall not carry brackish water, the weeds shall not grow in the fertile fields, that weeds will grow in the fertile fields, that mourning plants should grow in the open country. So the wrong things are going to start growing up. The whole Eden and its garden will be ruined. The mother should not seek out her child. The father should not say, "Oh, my dear wife." The junior wife should take no joy in his embrace, that the young child should not grow vigorous on his knee. That means the kids aren't going to grow up. That's what that statement means. That the wet nurse should not sing lullabies. And you know what that means. To change the location of kingship, to defile the seeking of oracles, to take kingship away from the land, to cast the eye of the storm on all of the land, to obliterate the divine plans by the order of On and Enlil. After On had frowned upon the lands, after Enlil, who's the storm god, that's Baal, that's Zeus, how Enlil had looked favorably on an enemy land, after Nintur had scattered the creatures that she had created, after Enki had altered the course of the Tigris and Euphrates, and that's how he created all of the fertile land here, after Utu had cast his course on the roads and highways. Utu is the sun god, also known later as Shamash, and in the Bible, any sun god or the sun itself is called Shamash, or Kamash. But And of course that's where they get the idea of the black hole sun from, is because Kamash and Kim and Kam means black, and so it's a blackened sun. But what they were saying is the sun is black, but then it's emitting light so bad you can't see it. Indeed, when we look at the sun, it's black background with fire on it and everything. So sunspots are black, so on. Anyhow, amazing they had that insight, or that they referred to it in that way. But anyhow, it says cast his curse on the roads and highways, and it shows you that at that time they had roads, and they had bigger roads that were highways. So I think this is where I was at. Let's see where I'm at. So as to obliterate the divine, to change its preordained plans, to alienate the divine, humiliate the princely son in his house. His house is Ikush Nagal. To break up the unity of the people of Nana, numerous as ewes, sheeple, to change the food offerings of Urim, the shrine of magnificent food offerings, that its people should no longer dwell in their quarters, that they should not, they should be given over to live in an inimical place, that Shemashki and Elam, the enemy, shall dwell in their place. Well, who's Shemashki? That's the sun god. There's the sun worshippers, the Elamites. They're sun worshippers. They worship Shemash. Ki is earth. That the Elamites they should dwell in their place. That its sheepfold in its own palace should be captured by the enemy. That Ibn Sin, the god Sin, should be taken to the land of Elam in fetters. From that Mount Zabu, on the edge of the sea, to the borders of Anshan, like a swallow that is flown from its house, he should never return to this city. So they're not going to return. They will not return. That on the two parallel banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, bad weeds should grow, that no one should set out on the roads, that no one should seek out the highways, that the city and its settled surroundings should be razed to ruined mounds, that its numerous black-headed people should be slaughtered. This is the common people. They, like the Egyptians, had black wigs they wore, and they shaved their heads. You can see it on all the statues. They had the lapis lazuli eyes and everything, and I've already made so many Sumerian connections with that. We're not going to go there. so the commoners get killed. That the host should not attack the fertile field. So there's no more farming going on, and these were the original farmers here. That seed should not be planted in the ground. That the melody of the cowherd's song should not resound in the open country. That butter and cheese should not be made in the cattle pen. That dung, and they were already at this time making butter, cheese, everything, wow. That dung should not be stacked on the ground. That the shepherd should not enclose the sacred sheepfold with a fence. That the song of the churning should not resound in the sheepfold. And they had little songs they'd sing when they do things, and whistle while you work, that type of thing. And I've been working on the railroad, whatever. They had their own songs for it and type stuff. And the dung being stacked, they would stack the dung up into the trenches that ran and fertilized the fields, and then whenever it came to flood, it would wash that in and nutrientize the field, and they already knew this fact. To decimate the animals of the open country, to finish off all living things, that the four-legged creatures of Shakan, shall no more, whenever they've got a symbol like that above the S, it's a sh, like in Shemitic languages, Semitics. And whenever it doesn't, or it has the other symbol onto it, it's a common S or a long S. Should lay no more dung on the ground, that the marshes should be as full of cracks and have no new seed. Now, this is like when it all dries up, and whenever a flood comes and they're in a creek bed and then it all dries up, it becomes that crackled mess. So now they're saying that that's what's going to happen to Eden. That sickly-headed reeds should grow in the reed beds and come to an end in a stinking morass. That there should be no new growth in the orchards. So you see at this time, they have a garden. Eden is a garden. There's orchards. And that it should all collapse by itself, so as to quickly subdue Urim, like a roped ox, to bow its neck down to the ground, the great charging wild bull, confident in its own strength, the primeval city of lordship and kingship built on sacred ground. So gone. It's going to be tore up. Well, is where Abraham came from, and this is the reason he left. I firmly believe. It's not exactly the straight timeline. It's close, real close in the timeline. Its fate cannot be changed. Who can overturn it? It is the command of On and Enlil. Who can oppose it? On is heaven, okay? And then there's a sky god that's Enlil. Lord of the earth and waters is Enki. And it goes from there. Ninmah and Ninhursag are the great woman. That's the wife of On, and so that ends up being the queen of heaven. And Ninhursag, and then she becomes a few different characters all the way through, and even into Asherah, who is the wife of the God of the Bible. And this is very connected to that story right there. On frightened the very dwellings of Sumer. The people were afraid. Enlil blew an evil storm. See, he's a storm god. Silence lay upon the city. Nintur bolted the door of the storehouses of the land. Enki blocked the water in the Tigris and Euphrates. I believe what this is referring to is that they had all the channels running off sideways off of it to irrigate the whole lands. And when you have a great flood come in and all the silt and it settles back in, those are gone now. They're all covered in. They're still there, but they've been all filled in. So in all intents and purposes, they're gone. You'd have to rebuild them all. So Utu took away the pronouncement of equity and justice. So there's no more equity and justice. And that was the sun god that made equity and justice, just like the sun god Jesus makes the equity and justice. Inanna handed over victory and strife and battle to a rebellious land. So this is when they lose their land. Ningirsu poured Sumer away like milk to the dogs. Turmoil descended upon the land, something that no one had ever known, something unseen, which had no name, something that could not be fathomed, the nothing. The lands were confused in their fear. The god of the city turned away. Its shepherds vanished. The people in their fear breathed only with difficulty. The storm immobilized them. The storm did not let them return. There was no return for them. The storm did not retreat. This is what Enlil, the shepherd of the black-headed people, did. Enlil, to destroy the loyal households, to decimate the loyal men, put the evil eye on the sons of loyal men, on the households, to decimate the loyal men, to put evil eye on the sons of the loyal men, on the firstborn. That is a familiar phrase. This is whenever the stink and morass cause disease, and they start dying from it, and they believe the gods have left them. And at this point, or shortly after, is whenever we feel Abraham is who came over into the Canaanite land. Enlil then sent down Gutium from the mountains, and this is where we get guitars from. And it's an instrument that they had too. They have these gourds and other instruments and stuff. I've got it in a few of my other videos. I don't want to go into their musical thing right now. This is interesting. Their advance was as the flood of Enlil cannot be withstood. The great wind of the countryside filled the countryside. It advanced before them. Now winds are bad. If you looked at my one about demons. The extensive countryside was destroyed. No one moved about there. If you look in the tale of Inanna, the lament of Inanna, she talks about coming back, and that people are floating in the rivers dead. It's all a stinking morass of everything, and the water is still at the bottom of the pyramid, and it looks like it's floating on water because it's flooded up to there. Well, if it's flooded up to there in Ur, and that's this far above sea level, whoa, how do you possibly get that? They also described it as being like 15 cubits high, some 45 feet, and in the Bible it also describes it how it raised up 15 cubits. Shortly after it talks about it being over the mountains, but here we go from there. Now, if these people say the second flood of this comes from the mountains, little different anyhow. So, their advance was like the flood of Enlil that cannot be withstood. The great wind of the countryside filled the countryside, advanced before them. The extensive countryside was destroyed. No one moved about there. Again, they repeat that. The dark time was roasted by hailstones and flames. This is your hailstones don't catch fire, right? So you could say, well, some people say this is a terrible storm, and it had hail associated with it. Well, what's the flames? Well, maybe you could get something to light with lightning on fire. What if hailstones and flames are actually meteors? The bright time was wiped out by a shadow. Missing two lines. Lacuna. In the darkness, noses were heaped up. Heads were smashed. The storm was a harrow coming from above. The city was struck by a hoe. On that day, heaven rumbled, the earth trembled, the storm worked without respite. Heaven was darkened, it was covered by a shadow. The mountains roared. Utu lay down at the horizon, sunset. Dust passed over the mountains. So dust passed over the mountains. There's a great wind and storms are coming there. And it doesn't sound like it's very natural, does it? In fact, these people are related to the gods causing these problems. Nana lay at the zenith. The people were afraid. So this is Nana, the moon god is straight up, and she's a full moon. People are afraid. The city's god left his dwelling and stood aside. The foreigners in the city even chased away its dead. Large trees were uprooted. The forest growth was ripped out. The orchards were stripped of their fruit. They were cleaned of their offshoots. The crop drowned while it was still on the stalk. The yield of the grain diminished. That sounds like a great flood. They piled up in heaps. Here's lacuna right here. They piled up in heaps. What did they pile up in heaps? Who knows? Gold up in heaps. Did they pile people up in heaps? Diamonds, spaceships. Boy, lacuna sucks, doesn't it? Anyhow, they piled something up in heaps. They spread something out like sheaves. There were corpses floating in the Euphrates, weapons, smashed heads. The father turned away from his wife, saying, "This is not my wife." The mother turned away from their child, saying, "This is not my child." He who had a productive estate neglected his estate, saying, "This is not my estate." The rich man took an unfamiliar path away from his possessions. In those days, the kingship of the land was defiled. There's tiara and crown that had been on the king's head were both spoiled. So he had dual crowns on his head. This sounds like Egyptians. Anyhow, he was known to have only had one crown. So are they talking about the queen too? The lands that had followed the same path were split into disunity. This is how the people got sheepled out, and they left. The food offerings of Urim The shrine of magnificent food arms were changed for the worse. Nana traded away his people, numerous as ewes. So, Nana traded away his people. Nanarsin traded away his people, numerous as ewes. So there you go. Where the hell did they go? They went north, back towards and through Arata. The king sat immobilized in his own palace. Ibn Sun was sitting in anguish in his own palace in Nemtila. This place of delight, he wept bitterly. The food dashing hoe on the ground was leveling everything. The flood dashing a hoe on the ground was leveling everything. Like a great storm, it roared over the earth. Who could escape it? Lacuna, to destroy the city, to destroy the house, so that traitors could lie on top of loyal men, and the blood of traitors flow upon loyal men. I think I'm going to stop there, guys, but this is the Great Flood here. And it goes on lamenting and going crazy. Now, where I found this, of course, let me show you this. If you will type in the lament for Sumer and Urim, you'll get an Etzel translation. You won't be able to go to this page. It'll probably look different than that. You won't find it in T.2.2.3 like on my thing. It may be on 223. It may be. Just look for Lament of Sumer and Urim if you want to read over this. Anyhow, so where did they go from here? Well, apparently they left and went. Well, where did Abraham go? Well, he went up and around and down in the Canaanite areas. And I'm telling you now, some of these people, this would have been a large amount of people, and they didn't put it all on one place necessarily. And some of these people came down into Canaanite lands. It wasn't just one guy, Abraham. And some of the other guys came and went farther west. It says in other tablets that they followed Utu. So if you follow the sun, it sets in the west. So you're going to keep going west. One of the tablets said that it was 22 weeks or something along that line. So I don't know how far you can get in 22 weeks, but it sounds like you'll be getting up and through Greece and on through there, heading more farther than that. So these are where some of these people had gone into, and these are your ancient Aryans also, that this is one point when things went all wrong. And of course it could be a natural process, a meteor hitting out in the water causing a giant tidal wave. Some of them hit the ground, that's causing the giant dust storm and things like that to come over. A great wind that just leveled everything. It got 15 foot below the ocean, or 45 foot below the ocean in some places, or below sea level, below the water level. And the weird conspicuous thing is that it says now it will carry brackish water. And if it's going to carry brackish water down a freshwater river, that has to come from an ocean. Right? So this is your great flood. And this is when everything goes to shit. And yeah, cool. We'll go into more of this. I'll do more Sumerian stuff coming up close. Let me know how interested you are down there in the comments. But like, share, and subscribe, guys. I appreciate y'all. Have a great day.